The massive shadow fell across Marisol's sleeping form like a thundercloud blocking the moon. Her swollen belly rose and fell with each labored breath as hay crackled beneath her worn calico dress. The barn door creaked in the midnight wind. And suddenly she wasn't alone. Kestrel Nighthawk stood 7 feet tall in his bare feet, his bronze chest gleaming with sweat from his late-night hunt. The giant Apache warrior had returned to find his sanctuary invaded, but instead of rage, something else stirred in his chest. The woman before him was clearly with child, her face gaunt with hunger, her lips cracked from thirst. Dark circles shadowed her closed eyes, and her small hands clutched a tattered shawl around her shoulders. "Little sparrow," he whispered in his native tongue, then switched to English. "What brings you to my shelter?" Marisol's eyes flew open, terror flooding her features as she scrambled backward into the hay. "Please," she gasped, one hand protectively covering her belly. "I didn't mean no harm. I was just ... I needed somewhere warm." Kestrel raised his massive hand slowly, the same gesture he used to calm wounded animals. "Peace, woman. I will not hurt you." His voice rumbled like distant thunder, but his tone held unexpected gentleness. "When did you last eat?" She stared at him, confusion replacing fear. This Apache giant could crush her with one hand, yet he spoke of food instead of demanding explanations. 3 days, she whispered honestly. "Maybe 4. Without another word, Kestrel turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the barn. Marisol remained frozen, unsure whether to flee or wait. Her legs were too weak to carry her far, and the baby inside her kicked restlessly as if sensing her distress. He returned carrying a leather pouch and a gourd of water. Kneeling beside her with surprising grace for such a large man, he offered, "Both, drink first, slowly." The water was cool and sweet, better than anything she'd tasted in weeks. As she drank, Kestrel studied her face in the moonlight streaming through the barn slats. High cheekbones spoke of Spanish blood, but her green eyes and auburn hair suggested Irish heritage. She was perhaps 20, beautiful despite her current state of desperation. "Your husband?" he asked quietly, though he already suspected the answer from her black mourning dress. "Dead." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. "Consumption took him last month. His family ... She paused, shame coloring her cheeks. "They said the baby wasn't his." Sighed, "I had to leave." Kestrel's jaw tightened. He'd seen too much cruelty from both white settlers and his own people to be surprised, but it still kindled anger in his chest. "Their loss," he said simply, "their blindness." Marisol looked up at him, startled by the conviction in his voice. "You don't know me. I could be everything they said." "I know enough," he stood, towering over her again. "You protected your child instead of yourself. You sought shelter instead of accepting defeat. That tells me who you are." The barn fell silent, except for the soft sounds of night creatures and Marisol's careful breathing. Finally, Kestrel spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. "From now on, you're mine to protect. Both of you." His dark eyes met hers steadily. "If you'll have the protection of a savage." Dawn painted the Colorado Territory sky in shades of rose and gold as Marisol woke to the scent of roasting meat. She'd slept deeper than she had in months, her body finally relaxed enough to rest. The baby had settled too, no longer the restless presence that kept her awake with constant movement. Kestrel sat cross-legged near a small fire he'd built outside the barn, turning a rabbit on a makeshift spit. His long black hair fell like a curtain around his shoulders, and morning light revealed intricate tattoos spiraling down his arm symbols she didn't recognize but found strangely beautiful. "You're awake," he observed without turning. "How do you feel?" "Better." She struggled to sit up, accepting his offered hand when he noticed her difficulty. His palm engulfed hers, calloused but gentle. "I thank you." "For the food? For not ... she gestured helplessly. "For not scalping you in your sleep?" His lips curved in the first smile she'd seen from him. "My scalping days ended years ago, Marisol." "Esperanza." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "Your wedding ring." He nodded toward her left hand. The inscription inside. "Miguel Esperanza, 1871. You twist it when you're nervous." Heat flooded her cheeks. She had been unconsciously turning. The thin gold band, a habit she'd developed since Miguel's death. "You can read English?" "And Spanish and French." Kestrel removed the rabbit from the fire, tearing off a portion and offering it to her. Missionaries are very thorough teachers, even when their students are supposed to be learning only about salvation. The meat was perfectly cooked, seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify. As she ate, he continued speaking, his voice carrying an odd formality that suggested education alongside his native upbringing. "My Apache name is Kestrel Nighthawk, but the white world knew me as Charles Nighthawk when I attended their school. In Denver, I learned their ways, their language, their customs." His expression darkened. "I also learned their hatred." "What happened?" Marisol asked softly. "What always happens when two worlds collide? Blood? Loss? The choice between becoming something you're not or being destroyed for remaining what you are." He fed small sticks to the fire, watching the flames dance. "I chose a third path. I became neither fully Apache nor white man, but something new, something alone. Until now," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. His dark eyes met hers. "Until now." They ate in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher. Marisol found herself studying this strange man who'd claimed her protection. Everything about him spoke of contradictions: savage and civilized, educated and primal, dangerous and incredibly gentle. When he spoke again, his words carried weight. "There's a cabin about 2 miles north. Abandoned since the owner died of fever last spring. It's solid, has a good well, and the roof doesn't leak much." He paused. "It could be made comfortable for a woman with child. You want me to live there? I want you safe and warm and fed." Kestrel's voice roughened slightly. "I made a promise, Marisol Esperanza. I don't make promises lightly." "But what?" "About you? Where will you live?" Something flickered in his expression. "There's a lean-to behind the cabin. I've used it before when hunting in this area. Close enough to keep my word, far enough to preserve your reputation." She almost laughed. "At that, my reputation? I'm a pregnant widow with no family, no money, and no prospects. What reputation do I have left to preserve?" "More than you think." Kestrel stood, his massive frame blocking the morning sun. "And more than you realize you deserve." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. When had anyone last spoken to her as if she had value? When had anyone last looked at her with anything other than pity or disgust? "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, studying the horizon. When he finally spoke, his words were barely audible above the morning breeze. "Because everyone deserves to be claimed by someone who sees their worth." 3 weeks later, Marisol barely recognized her life. The abandoned cabin had transformed under Kestrel's patient care into something approaching a home. He'd repaired the roof, chinked the gaps between logs, and built her a proper bed frame from fresh-cut pine. The lean-to he'd claimed for himself was barely visible from her window, tucked among the aspens behind the cabin like a secret. He brought her fresh meat daily: rabbit, deer, occasionally fish from the creek that wound through the valley. She'd protested at first, insisting she could provide for herself, but he'd simply looked at her swollen belly and asked, "With what? Your charming personality?" The dry response had startled a laugh from her, the first genuine laughter she'd experienced since Miguel's death. It felt strange, almost guilty, to find humor again. Now she stood at her small stove, attempting to make biscuits from the flour he'd somehow acquired. Cooking had never been her strength. Miguel had often joked that she could burn water, but pregnancy had awakened unexpected domestic instincts. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, knowing it was Kestrel. He was the only person for miles. He entered carrying a wooden cradle, his massive hands handling the delicate piece with infinite care. "I thought ... That is, the baby will need ... He set it down, near the fireplace, suddenly uncertain. "If you don't like it, I can make changes." Marisol stared at the cradle, tears pricking her eyes. It was beautiful, smooth as silk, decorated with carved ravens and mountain flowers. Every detail spoke of hours of painstaking work, of thought and care and hope. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers along the polished wood. "Kestrel, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Relief flooded his features. Ravens are for protection. In my culture, they guide souls safely through dangerous passages. Like birth? As evening fell, the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Marisol clung to Kestrel's hands, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. She'd never imagined birth could feel like this, not just pain, but transformation. Like becoming someone entirely new. "I can see the head," Kestrel announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Dark hair, beautiful." Minutes later, with one final push that seemed to tear her in half, Marisol felt the baby slip free. Kestrel's hands were there to catch the tiny form, his movement sure and gentle. "A daughter," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Perfect, beautiful." But something was wrong. The baby wasn't crying. Marisol struggled to sit up, fear clutching her chest. "Why isn't she?" Kestrel was already working, clearing the baby's airway with practiced efficiency. He rubbed her tiny chest, breathed gently into her nose and mouth. Long seconds passed, too long before a thin, outraged wail filled the cabin. "There she is," he murmured, wrapping the baby in clean cloths. Just needed a moment to decide if this world was worth joining. He placed the tiny bundle in Marisol's arms, and she felt her heart expand in ways she'd never imagined possible. The baby was indeed perfect, dark hair like her father's, but distinctly feminine features and the promise of green eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama." Kestrel finished the necessary tasks of birth with quiet efficiency, then sat beside them on the bed. The baby had settled into peaceful sleep, one tiny fist visible above the blanket. "She looks like you," Marisol said softly. "She looks like herself," he corrected, but his voice carried deep satisfaction. "What will you call her?" Marisol had thought about names for months, but now only one seemed right. "Esperanza, for hope," she looked up at Kestrel. "But also Ayana. I looked it up in one of your books. It means eternal blossom in Apache." Something shifted in Kestrel's expression. "You would give her an Apache name?" "She's your daughter." "Too," Marisol said simply, "in every way that matters. She should carry both her heritages." Kestrel leaned down to kiss the baby's forehead, then Marisol's. "Esperanza Ayana," he said formally. "I claim this child as my own, my daughter, my blood, my responsibility. And my gift to you," Marisol whispered, understanding instinctively that this was as sacred as any ceremony. "Our daughter." Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, a new family had been born. Not in the traditional way, perhaps, but in the way that mattered most, through choice, through love, through the conscious decision to claim and be claimed. As they settled into sleep, the baby warm between them, Marisol felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. They were no longer three separate souls seeking shelter. They were family, bound by something stronger than blood or law or social convention. They were bound by love freely given and gratefully received. Spring arrived with unseasonable warmth and an unexpected visitor. Marisol was hanging diapers on the line behind the cabin when she heard horses approaching. Esperanza gurgled contentedly in her basket nearby, now 4 months old and showing every sign of inheriting both her parents' strength and stubbornness. The rider who emerged from the tree line was a white man in his 50s, wearing the clothes of a prosperous rancher. His eyes swept the domestic scene with obvious disapproval, lingering on Marisol's simple dress and the baby basket before finding Kestrel, who'd appeared silently from the woods with fresh-killed rabbits. "You Nighthawk?" the stranger asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "I am." Kestrel set down his catch, positioning himself casually between the man and Marisol. "You have business with me?" "Name's Jeremiah Whitmore. I own the Broken Circle Ranch about 20 miles south." He dismounted, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Been hearing interesting stories about you and this arrangement." Marisol felt her stomach clench with familiar fear. She'd known this day would come, the day when their unconventional family would face judgment from the outside world. "What kind of stories?" Kestrel's voice remained level, but Marisol recognized the dangerous stillness that preceded action. "Stories. About a savage keeping a white woman. About half-breed children being raised in sin." Whitmore's eyes flicked dismissively toward Esperanza. "Decent folk are concerned." "Decent folk should mind their own business," Marisol said sharply, stepping forward despite Kestrel's warning gesture. Whitmore's attention shifted to her with obvious distaste. "Ma'am, I understand you've fallen on hard times, but living in sin with an Indian isn't the answer. There are proper solutions, charitable institutions, marriages that could be arranged." "I am married," Marisol interrupted. "In every way. That matters, not in the eyes of God or the law." Whitmore's voice hardened. "And that child?" "No decent man would claim a half-breed bastard." The words hit like physical blows, but before Marisol could respond, Kestrel moved. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, his massive hand was wrapped around Whitmore's throat, lifting the smaller man almost off his feet. "Choose your next." "Words very carefully," Kestrel said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of violence. "You're speaking about my wife and daughter. She's not your wife," Whitmore gasped. "No legal ceremony, double quotes. Legal according to who? Your laws? Your God?" Kestrel's grip tightened slightly. "I claimed her before spirits older than your Christ. She claimed me in return. The child is mine by choice and love, which makes her more legitimate than most children born in your precious marriage beds." He released Whitmore, who stumbled backward, rubbing his throat. But Kestrel wasn't finished. "You came here to threaten us, to suggest taking my family apart in the name of decency." His voice remained conversational, but every line of his body spoke of contained violence. "I'm going to give you a choice, Jeremiah Whitmore. You can ride away now and forget you ever found this place. Or you can stay and discover exactly how savage I can be when protecting what's mine." Whitmore looked between Kestrel's implacable expression and Marisol's defiant stance. Whatever he saw in their faces seemed to convince him. "This isn't over," he muttered, remounting his horse. "Society has rules, proper behavior. You can't just ignore. Watch us," Marisol said calmly. After Whitmore rode away, they stood in silence for several minutes. Finally, Kestrel spoke. "He'll be back, maybe with others. Then we'll face them together." Marisol picked up Esperanza, who'd slept through the entire confrontation. "This is our home, our family. I won't be driven away again." Kestrel studied her face, seeing new steel in her green eyes. The frightened, desperate woman he'd found in his barn was gone, replaced by someone who discovered her own strength. There may be consequences, legal challenges, social ostracism. There are always consequences for choosing love over convention. Marisol shifted the baby to her hip, facing him squarely. "But I'd rather be ostracized with you than accepted without you." That evening, as they sat by the fire with Esperanza playing on a blanket between them, Kestrel made a proposal. "We should make it legal. A proper ceremony, witnessed and recorded." Marisol looked up from her mending. "You want to marry me? I want to protect you. Both of you. If we're legally married, it becomes harder for people like Whitmore to interfere. And if no minister will perform the ceremony, no judge will sign the papers." Kestrel's smile was grim but determined. "Then we'll find ones who will. Even if we have to travel to California to do it." Marisol set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him. "Are you sure? Once we're legally bound, there's no going back. You'd be tied to a white woman and a child who isn't yours by blood." "I've been tied to you since the moment I whispered, 'You're mine in that barn,'" he said simply. "The papers will just make it official." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Then yes. Let's make it official. Let's give them no grounds to question our commitment. And if they still try, then they'll learn what happens when they threaten a family that's chosen to stand together." She looked down at Esperanza, who was trying to grab her own toes. "She deserves to grow up knowing she belongs somewhere, that she's wanted and claimed and loved." "She is," Kestrel said firmly, "by both her parents." Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing the world clean for new growth. Inside, a family that defied every social convention, prepared to fight for their right to exist, to love, to be. 2 years. Like birth, like death, like the space between one life and another. He moved to examine her biscuit attempts, carefully not touching but offering guidance. More flour. "The dough should not stick to your hands." She added flour, acutely aware of his presence beside her. Over the past weeks, she'd grown comfortable with his size, his quiet strength. He never crowded her, never made her feel trapped or threatened. Instead, his presence had become reassuring. "Kestrel," she said suddenly, "what did you do before? Before you found me, I mean, how did you live?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. "I hired out as a tracker. Scout for wagon trains sometimes, or help sheriffs find lost travelers. Most people were too afraid to refuse my services, even if they didn't trust me. That sounds lonely." It was. He paused in his instruction about needing. Loneliness becomes a habit after a while. You stop expecting anything different. Marisol shaped the biscuit dough with newfound determination, processing his words. "And now? Now I remember what it's like to have someone to come home to." The admission seemed to surprise him. "Even if home is just a lean-to behind your cabin." She looked up at him then, really looked. Saw past the intimidating size and foreign features to the man underneath. Saw the gentleness he tried to hide, the intelligence he'd been forced to conceal, the loneliness that matched her own. "It doesn't have to be," she said quietly. "What?" "Just a lean-to behind my cabin." She turned to face him fully, one hand resting on her belly where the baby was beginning its evening dance. "This could be our home, if you wanted." Kestrel went very still. "Amiriso double quotes. I know what people would say. I know what it would look like. But I also know that you've shown me more kindness in 3 weeks than I received in 3 years of marriage." She took a shaky breath. "I know that I sleep better knowing you're nearby. I know that I look forward to your visits more than I should. You're carrying another man's child. I'm carrying a child who will need a father, a strong man to teach them how to survive in a world that doesn't always show mercy. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. You already protect us. You already provide for us. You already care for us. The only thing missing is love? The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. I loved Miguel, Marisol said carefully. But what I feel for you, it's different, deeper, like recognition instead of discovery. Kestrel raised one large hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is, she leaned into his touch. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. The first snow of winter arrived early, blanketing the valley in pristine white that made the world seem hushed and sacred. Marisol woke to find her breath visible in the cold air and ice crystals on the inside of her windows. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, and she knew her time was approaching. She also knew she wouldn't face it alone. Kestrel had moved into the cabin the night after her confession, taking the small alcove near the fireplace and insisting she keep the bedroom for privacy. But privacy seemed less important now than warmth and companionship. They'd grown comfortable with shared space, with the domestic rhythms of morning coffee and evening conversations. The snow's deep, she observed, watching him bank the fire for better heat distribution. Will we be snowed in? For a while. He straightened, meeting her eyes. Are you afraid? Of being trapped with you? She considered this seriously. No. Of giving birth without a doctor or midwife? Terrified. Kestrel moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands covering hers. I've assisted with births before, both human and animal. I know what to do. Have you ever lost one? A mother or child? His expression grew grave. Yes, but not often, and never when I was properly prepared. He squeezed her fingers gently. I won't let anything happen to you, Marisol, either of you. The promise carried the weight of absolute conviction. She believed him, trusted him in ways that should have frightened her but instead brought deep peace. There's something else, she said, gathering courage. Something I need to say before the baby comes and everything changes. Kestrel waited, patient as always. I love you. The words came out in a rush, followed by nervous laughter. I know it's foolish and impractical and probably impossible, but I do. I love your gentleness with creatures weaker than yourself. I love your strength that never becomes cruelty. I love the way you see me, not as a burden or a fallen woman, but as someone worth protecting. He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. In my culture, when a warrior claims a woman, he does it publicly. He announces to the tribe that she is under his protection, that her children are his children, that her enemies are his enemies. He paused. We have no tribe here, Marisol, but I claim you anyway. Before God and this wilderness and whatever spirits watch over lost souls finding their way home. And I claim you, she whispered back, understanding instinctively that this was more binding than any marriage ceremony. I claim your protection and your strength and your heart, if you'll give it. It's been yours since the moment I found you sleeping in my barn. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture so tender it took her breath away. You and the child both. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if responding to the promise. Kestrel's eyes widened as he felt the movement against his chest. Strong, he murmured approvingly. This child will be a fighter. Like its parents, Marisol agreed. They spent the evening planning for the birth, gathering supplies and discussing what might be needed. But underneath the practical preparations ran a current of deeper change. They'd moved beyond protection and gratitude into something that felt like destiny. Later, As they settled into their separate sleeping areas, Kestrel spoke into the darkness. Marisol, yes? Whatever happens, remember that you are claimed. You belong somewhere now. You belong with someone who sees your worth. She smiled into her pillow, one hand resting on her belly where their future moved and stretched. So do you. Kestrel Nighthawk, so do you? Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping their small cabin in white silence. Inside, two wounded souls had found their way to healing in each other's arms. The baby kicked one more time, as if sealing the promise, and Marisol drifted off to sleep feeling safer than she had since childhood. She was claimed. She was loved. She was home. The pains began 3 days before Christmas, starting as a dull ache that Marisol initially mistook for the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. But as the morning wore on, the ache sharpened into distinct waves that took her breath away. Kestrel knew before she did. He'd been watching her with increasing intensity for days, noting the subtle changes in her posture and breathing. When she gripped the edge of the table during a particularly strong contraction, he was already moving to heat water and gather the supplies they'd prepared. How long between pains? He asked calmly, though she caught the slight tension in his voice. I donned single quotes T. Maybe 10 minutes? Another wave hit and she doubled over with a gasp. Kestrel, I'm scared. He was beside her in an instant, his large hands steady on her shoulders. Fear is natural. But remember, women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do. The labor progressed slowly through the day. Kestrel proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the process, guiding her through breathing techniques and helping her find comfortable positions. His presence was calming, his confidence infectious. In my tribe, he said during one of the quieter moments, birth is considered sacred. The arrival of new life, the continuation of the people. There are songs. He began humming, a low rhythmic melody that seemed to match her breathing. Teach me, she gasped between contractions. So he did, his deep voice weaving ancient words around her pain, transforming it into something powerful rather than frightening. The Apache birth song spoke of journeys and arrivals, of spirits choosing their earthly homes, of the courage required to cross from one world to another. Later, the small church in Denver buzzed with nervous energy as an unprecedented wedding took place. Marisol Esperanza, now Marisol Nighthawk in all but legal name, stood before a progressive minister who'd agreed to perform the ceremony despite social pressure. She wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, and Kestrel stood beside her in a black suit that emphasized his imposing stature. Between them, 2-year-old Esperanza Ayana toddled in a miniature dress that matched her mother's, her dark curls crowned with wildflowers. The congregation was small but determined, a few sympathetic neighbors, the minister's wife, and a surprising addition, Dr. Margaret Henley, a frontier physician who'd become Marisol's friend and advocate. There were also 3 Apache women who'd traveled from the reservation, Kestrel's distant relatives who'd come to witness his happiness. Do you, Charles Kestrel Nighthawk, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The minister asked, his voice carrying clearly through the small space. I do, Kestrel said, his deep voice steady. I claim her before God and law as I claimed her before the spirits, forever. And do you, Marisol Esperanza, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Her voice was strong, certain. I claim him as protector, provider, and partner. Forever. The ceremony was brief but binding. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kestrel lifted both Marisol and Esperanza into his arms, spinning them around as the small congregation cheered. Later, at the simple reception in the church hall, Dr. Henley approached with news that would change their lives again. I've been offered a position in San Francisco, she said quietly. Running a clinic for women and children in difficult circumstances. I want you both to consider coming with me." Marisol exchanged glances with Kestrel. They discussed leaving Colorado, especially after Whitmore had returned twice more with increasingly serious threats. "What would we do there?" Kestrel asked. "You could work with me. Your knowledge of traditional medicine, combined with your education, would be invaluable." And Marisol. She smiled at the younger woman. "You have a gift with people. Wounded souls trust you. You could help run the clinic." "It's a big city," Marisol said slowly. "More accepting of unusual families. More anonymous, certainly. And yes, more accepting. Esperanza could grow up without constantly defending her existence." That night, in their hotel room, they discussed the offer. Esperanza slept peacefully in her small bed, exhausted from the day's excitement and the attention of strangers who'd treated her like a princess. "What do you want?" Kestrel asked, sitting on the edge of their marriage bed. "I want our daughter to have choices," Marisol said without hesitation. "I want her to grow up believing she can be anything, do anything, love anyone. I want her to know she's beautiful because she carries both our heritages, not despite it. And you? What do you want for yourself?" Marisol joined him on the bed, taking his large hands in her smaller ones. "I want to matter. To do something meaningful with the life you saved." She paused. "And I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life, knowing we chose each other freely and completely. Then we'll go to California." His decision was immediate and certain. "We'll start over, build something new, together." 6 months later, their small house in San Francisco overlooked the bay where ships brought people from around the world seeking new beginnings. The clinic thrived, serving women and children who'd been overlooked by traditional medicine. Kestrel's reputation as both healer and protector grew, while Marisol discovered she had real talent for organizing and comforting. Esperanza thrived too, growing into a confident child who spoke 3 languages and accepted her unique heritage as a source of strength rather than shame. She played with children from 12 different cultures, learning early that family came in many forms. On a warm evening in spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson, Marisol reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, one hand resting on her belly where their second child grew. "Choosing us over the life you could have had?" Kestrel considered this seriously, as he did all her questions. "I regret the pain we've had to endure. The prejudice, the legal battles, the people who tried to separate us." He paused, watching Esperanza chase butterflies in their small garden. "But regret choosing you? Choosing her? Choosing this life we've built together?" He shook his head firmly. "Never. Even though it's been difficult? Especially because it's been difficult. Easy love isn't real love, Marisol. Real love is what remains when everything else has been tested and tried and beaten down, and it still chooses to stay." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the baby flutter in response to his deep voice. Their daughter, they'd learned it was another girl, would grow up in a world slightly more accepting than the one Esperanza had entered. Progress came slowly, but it came. "I love you, Charles Kestrel Nighthawk," she said formally, using both his names as she did in moments of deep emotion. "And I love you, Marisol Esperanza Nighthawk," he replied, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted of promises kept and futures embraced. Esperanza ran up to them then, her small hands full of wildflowers. "For Mama," she announced, climbing into Marisol's lap with the casual confidence of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world. "They're beautiful, mi amor," Marisol said, braiding the flowers into her daughter's dark hair.